That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
I have had a serious issue as of late, and that is when we are in these underdog drafts, once we get to the beginning of the third round, I feel like it's so much harder to find wide receivers than it was last year. I mean, last year we were just kind of drafting running backs. We were taking Joe Mixon, but I mean, you knew the clear-cut tiers of players that we were going round by round with. And this year, it's a little bit muddied up. So I'm going to try to do my best to not only help myself, but also help everybody that supports this video by going through and taking a deeper dive into these top 12 wide receivers and try to figure out exactly what order these players should be going off the board. But of course, before we get into it, please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, let me know how stupid I am, subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, if you want to have some fun in your life, if you want to get into some of those drafts with us on the live stream, go hop into some drafts. I mean, from just the public lobby, make sure you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. With Underdog Fantasy, got to be 18 years old, but all the drafts over there are real money leagues where you don't have a waiver wire. You don't submit your starting lineup. It's automatically done for you at the end of every week. So I'm going to be drafting over 200 teams there. I cannot wait to continue to get those live streams going. Make sure you sign up with promo code FLOCK if you want our 2022 rankings, our 2022 Dynasty rankings, our 2022 Dynasty research book. Please go take advantage of that. Also, with promo code FLOCK, they'll match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. You can find the link in the description. But that should be it. Let's go through. Let's revisit the top 6 rankings that we have already had at the wide receiver position that we have taken a deeper look into. And we had Cooper Kupp 1, Justin Jefferson 2, Jamar Chase 3, Stephon Diggs 4, Devontae Adams 5, and previously when we made that wide receiver ranking video, probably about a week ago at this point, I had Deebo Samuel at 6, but after taking a deeper look into this, despite Deebo Samuel being the wide receiver 3 last year on a per game basis, with the possibility Deebo's out of San Francisco, and combined with the fact that Deebo Samuel's had an extensive injury history, combine that with the fact that while I love Trey Lance from a fantasy perspective, given his rushing upside, we're unsure what he's going to be as a passer. I think we got to move Deebo down, and the wide receiver we're going to be moving up to wide receiver 6 is actually going to be CeeDee Lamb. Now with CeeDee Lamb, of course, this has been everybody's favorite breakout wide receiver for 3 years in a row now. I mean, he was drafted in 2020 out of OU, and I will say I'm a little bit biased when it comes to CeeDee Lamb. I actually got to see him play in person against the University of Texas. He smoked us. He was about one of the best wide receivers I've ever seen in person. Of course, that doesn't matter from a fantasy football perspective, but I will admit I'm a little bit biased here. And with CeeDee Lamb, this is a wide receiver that has been just slightly disappointing over the past 2 years. His rookie season, he was the wide receiver 31 on a per game basis. His sophomore year, we were expecting an elite jump. He was a high-end wide receiver 2. He was the wide receiver 16 on a per game basis. And of course, the elephant in the room is Amari Cooper has exited the room. Amari Cooper no longer in this wide receiver core. Now you are still left over with Michael Gallup. You are still left over with Dalton Schultz. I actually thought with Gallup coming back into the offense, he was going to phase out Dalton Schultz, but now that Amari Cooper's leaving, I think Dalton Schultz is here to stay. I think that role is going to be very safe. Now, if we're looking at this Dallas Cowboys offense, however, and if we can try to project CeeDee Lamb to take another step forward with his target share in said offense, I think you do have that elite level ceiling, because with this Dallas Cowboys team, they actually were the number 1 offense with overall points scored last year. And with CeeDee Lamb in particular, he now has a path to potentially have access to 26 to 28% of his team's target share. And if that does happen with CeeDee Lamb, we can expect that elite jump up. And with Lamb, if you're looking at his per game numbers, if anything, I think they could be a little bit better than what we saw over the past 2 seasons, because there's no reason to assume that CeeDee Lamb cannot have an above average touchdown rate in the NFL. I mean, based on what we saw at OU, I think that's entirely in the range of outcomes. And with CeeDee Lamb, he already averaged 7.5 targets per game last year. So if he can just take yet again a step forward, 8 targets a game, based on the efficiency you have with Dak Prescott, is a player that does still have access to that elite ceiling. I know we've been repeating this over and over and over again in this video, also last year as well. But keep in mind, CeeDee Lamb this month turned 23 years old. On April 8th, he turned 23. So if we would have recorded this video back at the beginning of April, he still would have only been 22. There are players in this draft class that are older than CeeDee Lamb. There are rookies coming into the NFL right now that are older. He is still going to continue to develop at the position with no Amari Cooper, leaving behind a crap ton of targets. I can be excited because let's pull up the target share that we had with Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper averaged 6.93 targets per game this past season. He was the wide receiver 1B to CeeDee Lamb's wide receiver 1A. Now it's going to be CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver 1, Michael Gallup, the wide receiver 2. I am very excited about this. And honestly, with everything happening with Debo, I think that we possibly need to move Debo down another spot. I hate to do this, especially if you go and you're in an underdog fantasy draft. I promise you, you'll see Debo Samuel go higher than this. Like if I pull up underdog fantasy, we check out their ADP. Debo Samuel has an ADP of wide receiver 6, but I think we may need to move him down to wide receiver 8 because Tyreek Hill is going to be our next guy. Now, of course, Tyreek Hill has drastically outproduced where we are ranking him over the past 3 seasons. I mean, with Tyreek Hill, he has been a top 10 wide receiver every single year on a per game basis over the past 3 seasons. The only other wide receiver that has been as consistent as Tyreek Hill with his fantasy production is Davante Adams. Yes, that is crazy. Now, the difference between Davante Adams and Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, I think you actually have a more significant downgrade from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa than you do from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr. Trust me, I love Rodgers. I think he's fantastic. It's more so that I'm a fan of Derek Carr, and I don't necessarily know what to expect yet with Tua Tagovailoa. So I'm seeing a larger downgrade for Tyreek Hill, and at the same time, I think there's more target competition for Tyreek Hill in Miami if we look at Jalen Waddle. I mean, Jalen Waddle, his rookie season was fantastic. Now, of course, Jamar Chase is going to get every single headline, as he should, when Jamar Chase was one of the best rookie wide receivers of all time, if not the best rookie wide receiver of all time last year. But Jalen Waddle, I mean, quietly went out there and averaged 8.75 targets per game. Almost 9 targets a game as a rookie. Now, of course, Jalen Waddle actually a little bit older. He stayed all 4 years at Alabama. I think that he has a solid reason, though. He was at Alabama the same time you had Jerry Jeudy, the same time that you had Henry Ruggs, the same time that you had Devontae Smith. I mean, there were so many talented wide receivers in that offense. Now, what's funny is Jalen Waddle is actually older than CeeDee Lamb. We just pulled that up. Jalen Waddle is about 7 months older than Lamb, which just goes back to saying that CeeDee Lamb can continue to progress at the position. But I think the presence of Waddle will eat into Tyreek Hill just slightly. Now, of course, if you're Tyreek Hill and if you're in an elite level offense, it's not going to matter too much. I mean, if you're in Kansas City, hell, Travis Kelce can still be the tight end 1 in fantasy. Travis Kelce can still go out there and average over 100 receiving yards per game, and you're going to be a top 10 wide receiver. It's just different when we take that overall offense and we shrink it down. When we can assume that Tua is going to have 1,000 less passing yards than what you would see with a Patrick Mahomes, it is more difficult to get there with Tyreek Hill. I'm also hesitant with these wide receivers changing teams. So hopefully that was a decent enough explanation on why I am going to have Tyreek Hill ranked down here as wide receiver 7, a couple spots behind someone like Davante Adams, even though Tyreek Hill is younger. I believe Tyreek Hill only 28 years old. Now, our next wide receiver, this is where I think we get the fall off. We're going to have Debo at wide receiver 8, but then at wide receiver 9, I'm going to have Mike Evans. And now this is something that I thought about for quite a while, and I will say, if Chris Godwin was 100% healthy, say Chris Godwin tore his knee up week 1 last year where we didn't have to be concerned about Godwin missing the beginning of the season. We didn't have to be concerned about Godwin 100% missing training camp. Then I would not have Mike Evans ranked this highly because with Mike Evans, he does appear to have an unsustainable touchdown rate. Like if you're looking at his touchdown rate this past season, it was at 12.29%. That's absurd. That's one of the highest marks in the NFL. That's higher than Devontae Adams has come in the past 3 years. Let me just scroll through. It looks like Mike Evans had the highest touchdown rate in the NFL last year, which is a massive red flag in terms of projecting him to regress in the touchdown category based on how many targets he was getting. Now, there is a little bit of nuance with this because, of course, we can say touchdown rate is very volatile, and if you are an outlier like this, it will come back down to earth. But Mike Evans is Mike Evans. This man's 6'5". This man is a red zone threat. This man had almost 12% as a touchdown rate last year as well. So maybe Mike Evans is the one player that you can project to be up to 9 to 10% of his targets going to touchdowns, especially when you are attached to Tom Brady. Now with Evans, he was the wide receiver 15 this past season, the wide receiver 14 the year before that, and the wide receiver 5 the year before that. You just have that consistency. You have Tom Brady coming back in. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers were a top 3 offense with overall points scored on a per game basis last year. Now I do expect that to regress slightly because I'm not assuming that Tom Brady's going to be as good this season as he was the previous year. Now, of course, I know everybody's going to hate me saying that. Trust me, I live in Tampa. I am rooting for Tom Brady. I am rooting for Mike Evans. I hope that he doesn't regress. But I think we could potentially see this offense fall to being closer to the middle of the pack. But with the departure of Antonio Brown and combine that with the fact that Godwin is not 100% healthy, if Godwin misses the first month of the season, Mike Evans would probably be the wide receiver 1 during that time period. The wide receiver 2 behind Cooper Kupp, but you get the point. He has that elite level ceiling. He's been consistent over the past 3 years. I don't think we need to expect the fall off anytime soon. He is 29 years old. He doesn't win with his elite athleticism anyway. So we are going to have Evans here as our wide receiver 9 on Underdog Fantasy. He has an ADP of wide receiver 10. So we are right in line. But a player being drafted ahead of Mike Evans on Underdog Fantasy is going to be A.J. Brown. I have A.J. Brown ranked as our wide receiver 10, and I'll be the first person to say, A.J. Brown has an elite ceiling. If you look at what he did his rookie year, what he did his second season, it looked like A.J. Brown was on a path to be the best wide receiver in the NFL. Now, of course, this past season, he does take a step back. And this is something that I feel like not too many people are talking about. He does have his career high in targets per game, but this overall offense just wasn't as good as what we saw in 2020, as what we saw when Ryan Tannehill took over in 2019. A.J. Brown was the wide receiver 26 on a per game basis, a high-end wide receiver 3. Now, of course, I'm not expecting A.J. Brown to be a high-end wide receiver 3 again this upcoming season. I have him ranked as the wide receiver 10. But when we haven't seen the same level of consistency that what we have with a Mike Evans, I'm going to be slightly more hesitant, especially when we can assume that this Tennessee Titans offense is going to be centered around trying to run the ball over and over and over again. And they're not going to have the same level of pass attempts that you're going to see with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's why I am personally going to have Evans ahead of A.J. Brown. With A.J. Brown, there are a couple nice things. As we said, he did have a career high in targets per game. He did go over 8 targets a game this past year. Going into year 4 as well, I'd imagine that A.J. Brown, maybe by the time you're watching this video, but at some point, A.J. Brown is going to be getting a new contract. He is only 24 years old as well, so he's just now entering into his prime. There are a lot of reasons to be excited about A.J. Brown. Clearly is that Alpha X wide receiver. He has the size, 6'1", 225 pounds. He was hyper efficient through the first 2 years. I just don't know if we can have him ahead of someone like Debo. That was the wide receiver 3 last year. I don't think we can have him ahead of someone like Mike Evans that has just consistently dominated, is going to be in a much better offense. And really, we've seen Mike Evans's floor, to be honest, as A.J. Brown's ceiling so far. Now, of course, A.J. Brown can continue to progress, but that's why I'm drafting Mike Evans over A.J. Brown. And now, speaking of players with a very high floor, Keenan Allen's being drafted as the wide receiver 13 on Underdog, but I'm going to have him ranked as the wide receiver 11. This is someone that last year was the wide receiver 10 on a per game basis. The year before, the wide receiver 7. The year before that, the wide receiver 13. And speaking of options that are most likely going to score more touchdowns this upcoming season, I think Keenan Allen can be one of those guys. Now, of course, Keenan Allen is a little bit older. He falls in line with someone that we're going to talk about next with his age. And with Keenan Allen, he's the opposite of Mike Evans. Y'all know what I was talking about with Mike Evans. Yes, the touchdown rate is at one end of the extremes. Usually we're just saying that touchdown rate's always coming back down to league average. We're chasing those yards. We're chasing those targets. But with Mike Evans, based on his frame, based on how they use him in that Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, and we've seen that for seasons now, we can project Mike Evans to have one of the highest touchdown rates in the NFL. With Keenan Allen, we can project him to have one of the lower touchdown rates in the NFL. I mean, he is used closer to the line of scrimmage. He's used more so over the middle of the field. Not necessarily the best red zone weapon, but still, his touchdown rate fell under 4% this past season. That's what actually changed from 2020 to 2021 when he went from the wide receiver 7 to the wide receiver 10. I mean, he actually averaged more yards in 2021. They are about identical, but still, he had almost 10 targets a game yet again. The touchdown rate was down there at 3.8%. I think that could actually come up. I think you could see double-digit touchdowns for Keenan Allen, especially considering the fact that you have Justin Herbert. You have an elite-level quarterback stepping into his own prime. I'm excited. I actually like the fact that Mike Williams is coming back. I think Mike Williams can effectively stretch the field for Keenan Allen to operate underneath. Keenan Allen just has that very high floor. I'm going to be drafting him at wide receiver 11. And like I said, the lowest finish he's had over the past 3 years is wide receiver 13. So I'm going to be drafting him ahead of his ADP. I think Keenan Allen's a very, very safe pick. And our last wide receiver in these rankings, he's being drafted ahead of Keenan Allen on Underdog. I'm not going to do it. It's going to be DeAndre Hopkins. Now with Hopkins, I think he actually does have a higher ceiling. Of course, we saw that step back this past season, but there are reasons for that. I mean, reason A, DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, he missed time. The first time really in his NFL career that DeAndre Hopkins missed more than a single game. It was crazy. If you pull up DeAndre Hopkins and his statistics, Thomas, please throw him right here. He got 16 games, 160 targets, just over and over and over again for the longest time. And then you have that one season this past year in 2021 where he does take that step down. He is 30 years old as well. That's where I'm starting to get slightly concerned because we see that step down with that age attached to it. But like I said, there were reasons for this. There are reasons why he was a low-end wide receiver 2 last year on a per-game basis, and I'm drafting him as a wide receiver 1 still. You had his own injury combined with Kyler Murray going down for a large portion of the season as well. If we take a step back, if we ignore what you had from DeAndre Hopkins in 2021. DeAndre Hopkins in 2020 averaged exactly 10 targets a game. In 2019, he averaged exactly 10 targets a game. They just lost Christian Kirk. Rondale Moore is nothing close to DeAndre Hopkins. Rondale Moore is not even going to be playing in the same area of the football field. Rondale Moore is going to be operating closer to the line of scrimmage, where DeAndre Hopkins is going to be more so on the outside. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be operating further down the field than what you have with a Rondale Moore as well. Now, this team could easily go out there and take a wide receiver in the first round, take a wide receiver in the second round. If they got someone like, I would say in the first round, Treylon Burks isn't going to fall to them. But if they go wide receiver round 1, yeah, I'm probably going to be dropping DeAndre Hopkins a little bit. But they could even go a wide receiver on day 2. And if they take a wide receiver on day 2, I don't think it's that big of a deal because Christian Kirk was a very good option. I mean, I think the loss of Christian Kirk is actually going to help DeAndre Hopkins this upcoming season. Like I said, I am speaking on the bullish case of DeAndre Hopkins, even though technically I have him ranked lower than where his underdog ADP currently is, and I am going to be drafting Keenan Allen ahead of him. I just see Keenan Allen as potentially the higher floor player and DeAndre Hopkins maybe as the higher ceiling. But let me talk about some honorable mentions real quick, players that I did not include here. Another option on Underdog Fantasy that's actually going ahead of Keenan Allen in almost every single draft is T. Higgins. So T. Higgins, if you're on Underdog, you will see him drafted as the top 12 wide receiver. I love T. Higgins. I don't want to say anything bad about Higgins. I just don't necessarily see how we put him ahead of Keenan Allen. When, as I've said, Keenan Allen's pretty much worst season over the past 3 years is stacked up with T. Higgins' best season. Now, of course, like I said, you're going to expect those younger wide receivers to continue to improve, and you're going to expect those veteran wide receivers to potentially take a step back. But at the same time, I actually think that Herbert's probably a better option for Keenan Allen than Joe Burrow is for T. Higgins. With Keenan Allen, I mean, if you're comparing him to T. Higgins, he's competing for targets with Mike Williams, whereas T. Higgins competing for targets with Jamar Chase as well as Tyler Boyd. So I hope that was an adequate explanation as well why I'm potentially not going to have T. Higgins in the top 12, even though that's where he's being drafted on Underdog. But of course, thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment. And if you want to have some fun in your life, go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK. When you make that first deposit, you'll get so many things. Please take advantage to support the channel. That's all I got for you. Really appreciate you, and I hope you have a great day.